Coming up on Working Fire.
We had a wall fall, the ceiling fell down, and we have people trapped inside.
Go behind the fire line for the full report on the firefighter fatalities in Stockton, California. Hello and welcome to Working Fire. I'm Don Marsh.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Jan Demas. We go behind the fire line this month with the full report on the Stockton Firefighter fatalities, and we'll take a look at a major fire in Philadelphia. The Stockton Fire Department has buried 2 of its own after the first firefighter fatalities in 50 years in that community. Nancy Higgins reports on what happened that terrible night and passes along Stockton's lessons.
Attention Engine 9, Engine 6, Engine 4, Code 2 is a safety engine. Truck 4, Support 2, Battalion 2, Operator 1 in District 35. A garage fire, 50 West Mendocino.
The call had gone out for a garage fire, but upon arrival, firefighters found much more.
The first-in crews had heavy fire involvement when they arrived. And in fact, the fire was impinging on a home on either side of this, a home to the east as well as a home to the west of the original fire structure. So some of the efforts, initial efforts, were directed toward exposure protection. 2 lines were advanced immediately through the front door to attack the seat of the fire and looked for the occupant of the building. We had been told while en route that there was a strong likelihood of someone being in the building. The time of the day of the fire, a little after 4 in the morning, it's a likely scenario that there would be someone inside. And so, yes, they were doing search and rescue as well as fire suppression activities in the structure.
Stockton firefighters called this a typical bread and butter fire. They were concerned about life safety and saving the home. And even with a significant amount of fire showing, first-in crews believed they could rescue the occupant.
We've never not made the effort. It's always been, we will do whatever it takes to save a life. And that's the way we've always been. We go in and do what we have to do. I mean, obviously there's a point where you'd say there's nobody that is alive in this structure, period, because it's totally involved. But if we come on scene and there's any way, shape, or form, in our estimation, somebody could still be alive, we're going to go in and attack that fire and send another crew in to do search and rescue.
The house at 26 West Mendocino had been a typical single-story residential home in a quiet neighborhood. But in 1952, the owner built an addition onto the back of the house. That included a dance studio on the first floor and a second-floor master bedroom and sun deck. Firefighters didn't know it at the time, but it was in that second-story bedroom that 82-year-old Jesslyn Ambrogio succumbed to the smoke and fire on February 6th. Initial responders didn't know about the addition to the home.
The way the fire was burning and had vented and so on, it wasn't clearly obvious from the street that this was a 2-story house, that the second-story addition was largely camouflaged by the fire conditions.
We didn't even realize that the house was 2-story. The original engine company took a line in the front door, an 1 3/4 line, and probably expended their air bottles. Well, in fact, they did. And they had even come out to replenish the air in their bottle. When this thing all of a sudden let go and dropped down, the whole backside, upper story, just dropped to the first floor.
Bryan, Truck 4, we had a wall fall, the ceiling fell down, and we have people trapped inside. People trapped. It's support 2, we have a collapse in the back of the building. Looks like the garage area. Command copy.
There had been as many as 15 firefighters in the house when the collapse occurred. All but 3 had escaped. Those on the outside knew they had people trapped and immediately began their rescue effort. But it took a few minutes to establish exactly who the trapped firefighters were.
Truck 4. Everyone count 4. Can we get a report on your men? You have a 4 there. You have a count of all 4 men? Negative. It's another 3 men golden that we're still trying to get out. Other than that, everybody else is accounted for.
Captain Oscar Barrera and firefighters Bryan Golden and Brett Laws lay under the mountain of rubble and lumber.
I come in the front door, Jack was already there, and we knew we had a collapse, over the radio we heard men trapped, men trapped. We started looking along the wall, the bit which would be the back wall of the main house, and in the rubble there we see 2 pair of boots sticking out. I thought, and he thought, that was the guy that we were looking for. So we immediately got a hearse tool inside and cleared away the rubble and debris, knocked down some more fire, which was shooting out from underneath this floor, and stuck the hearse tool in and began to raise this floor. And we told the guys that were standing there helping us, as soon as we get this floor up to a height where we can start to move this guy out of there, to jerk him out from underneath there. You know, don't be gentle about it, just pull him out. So when we pulled him out, it turned out to be Oscar. And we didn't even know Oscar was there. We looked back underneath there, and back in this cavity back farther, you could see another body. You could see an MSA yellow bottle. So we knew right then that there was another firefighter underneath. We thought this to be the person that we originally were looking for. And after, what, 20, 30 minutes of crawling underneath there, dragging 2 hearse tools and a bunch of cribbing, we managed to get the floor up high enough to where we could get over to this other individual, and it turned out to be Brett Laws.
The weight of the collapse made it impossible to lift the flooring off the firefighters.
The manpower itself to rescue Oscar, we couldn't budge. We couldn't begin to budge the floor that was on top of Oscar.
How many of you were trying to do that?
There was probably 8 to 10 immediately on arrival there of the collapse, and he couldn't be budged.
Because the whole second story was involved. The floor, the walls, the furniture, and the roof all collapsed down to the first floor, and these 3 people were underneath that first floor. So there's no humanly way. If we'd had 25 guys there, we'd have never been able to lift it physically. We had to have some mechanical means of lifting it, and the hearse tool is what we used. The hearse tool had no problem lifting the outside edge of the wall, but when we got it back underneath into the middle, it even strained to lift that. And it produces quite a bit of pressure, you know. But it had to strain. It had to sit there and actually work before it actually moved that up, and then we would crib up as it moved it up. So it was kind of a ticklish proposition.
The first rescue was Captain Oscar Barrera. He was the captain of Engine 6, which was the second engine on scene. At the time of the collapse, Oscar was right at the separation from the single-story portion of the building and the 2-story portion. So he was caught right at the edge. Again, in interviewing Oscar after the fire, he said there was no warning, no sounds, anything. It just dropped. Hit him on the helmet, drove him down, and pinned him primarily by the lower part of his body. He was determined not to lose consciousness, he told me, because he knew that he needed to assist in his own rescue efforts. There were probably at least 6 or 8 other firefighters in the building in the immediate vicinity of the collapse when the collapse occurred. So there was a lot of help that was immediately available. And Oscar helped direct his own rescue operations. He told them what part of his body was pinned and so forth. And they brought in equipment and lifted the flooring off of him and were able to free him. In the course of that, he sustained some serious burn injuries.
Rescuers continued their efforts to get the other 2 firefighters out, but the weight of the collapse continued to be a problem, and as time passed, it became painfully clear that firefighters Golden and Laws had not survived. Their bodies were removed after more than an hour of cutting, lifting, and cribbing the collapse area. The rescue effort had taken its toll on responders.
I myself was personally drained. I was just drained. I was soaking wet, and I couldn't imagine the amount of time that it took. It seemed like it went by very fast. But I was completely drained physically and mentally from what we had just taken care of, what we did, our tasks. It was, it's hard to explain, really.
CISD teams met responders back at their stations.
Some calls were made through our communication center to notify the critical incident stress debriefing teams. Plans were made to convene them at our central fire station where we have classroom facilities. someone on the scene of the fire, I'm not sure who it was, made arrangements for school buses, or excuse me, metropolitan buses to come to the scene to transport the firefighters to the debriefing session so that they weren't asked to drive fire apparatus and so on. So basically what we did is we brought fresh crews in, they staffed the apparatus that was already on scene, and by bus we transported the on-duty firefighters that had dealt with the rescue and the loss of their own crewmates to the debriefing or diffusing session.
Firefighters asked themselves over and over again how the collapse could have occurred and why the construction consisted of such heavy timber.
Behind me is the second-story floor that came down on the firefighters, along with a lot of other debris and the roof trapping them. Now, investigators have brought the floor back to one of the fire stations so they could begin piecing their investigation together.
Marty Galindo is the fire investigator for the Stockton Fire Department. He walked me through the remains of 26 West Mendocino.
The original permit that was taken out on this in about 1952 included about 800 square feet back here on the second story. Now, there were obviously some modifications as we began to take this thing apart piece by piece. We could see that there had been some changes to the original plans. Just exactly what those changes were, we weren't able to come up with a lot of detail on them because this lady lived alone. The neighbors were not privy to come inside the house. We couldn't even piece together, you know, what it looked like inside, the contents, the fuel loading, etc., things that we would normally have access to. So just to put it back together again, as we moved these things, we started seeing indications that, yeah, this was the original. You can see where the flooring takes on a different shape. Those are 4x8 sheets of plywood there, whereas over on this side, they're tongue and groove hardwood flooring. You could see that there was another addition at some point later on. What we had expected to find was just ordinary wood frame construction that you would find in a, you know, a residential type dwelling. But what actually presented itself was some very heavy beam type construction on this second floor. It consisted of 2 3/4 inch by 11 inch boards running east and west that were about 20 feet in length. So we thought, and they were on 12-inch centers, which was extremely heavily built. So we thought, well, what in the world is the reason for this, and why was it built to these kinds of specifications? Having now looked at the plans, we can see that that heavy construction was required to span an area of about 23 feet, so from bearing wall to bearing wall. So what that ended up doing is you had to have that type of heavy timber in there to support the upper stairs and over that great of a span.
Okay, Marty, tell me, give me an idea of where the firefighters were at the time of the collapse.
Well, there had been initially 2 attack lines brought in. One line was brought through this opening here, which was a window that had been made into a passageway. And the second line had come in through a sliding glass door back here off the kitchen. Now, Oscar had just come back in after refilling his air cylinder, and the other 2 members of the crew were inside here, and in this approximate location, Brett Laws was here, Bryan Golden was here. Oscar had just walked into the room when the collapse occurred, and that drove everyone down to the floor. This happened to be the lowest, or the apex of the collapse. The floor didn't come and pancake down per se. It came down in a kind of a moderate V shape.
Do we know what the cause of the fire was at this point?
We don't have a wire. We're saying it's most likely it was electrical, but we don't have a wire to hold up and say this is the short that happened. There was a electric blanket found in the vicinity. There were the controls, of course, electric blanket, and then there was an extension cord that possibly powered that blanket. So these things were the only thing that were in the source or in the area of origin, and were indicating that that was the most likely source of the fire. But as I said, we don't have a piece of material to hold up and say this is it. This was where the first line came through. Naturally, the front door, as I pointed out outside, that there was no access to the rear yard because of the flame that were coming from both sides, literally wall to wall and house to house. So the first line came through this door, and they proceeded to attack the main body of the fire as they perceived it through this opening here, which we looked at on the other side. The second line, the backup line, came in and went through the kitchen and opened a sliding door that leads into what they believed was a patio. And there was a large body of fire out there. They attempted to put that fire out as this other side was being attacked at the same time.
Obviously, she had a lot of collectibles. How did that impact the first-in crews bringing in the lines?
Well, they had a bit of difficulty negotiating the boxes that were lined on the floor. As you said, she had collected 60 years of memorabilia and memories, and those were in boxes for the large part on the floor. So the smoke line is almost to the floor, so firefighters, you know, were trying to negotiate their way through this maze of boxes into the back room, and they had some difficulty in doing that.
The investigation continued as Stockton planned this memorial for Bryan Golden and Brett Laws. Over 2,000 firefighters from 225 different fire departments gathered to honor their fallen colleagues. Stockton appointed personnel to help the families of the fallen firefighters during the grieving process.
We had two captains, actually three captains, who were assigned to the Golden family, and their main role was to just be liaison, help the family. They're from out of town. Matter of fact, they live in San Jose, and so they're not familiar with the area. They came into town, and then we just had somebody that was constantly with them to help them, make sure they had communications with people that they need to communicate with, make sure that they had a place to eat and place to stay. We did all that kind of thing for them just to help that transition of that, you know, this very sad time, and just help them with whatever they needed.
The memorial allowed fire personnel to share their grief and their pride in their profession.
The Stockton Fire Department has a long tradition of being an interior attack aggressive fire department. What took place on the morning of February 6th was in keeping with that tradition. I think the entire department has been devastated, traumatized by what took place. And at the same time, I think the entire organization has never been prouder of the department, how we've pulled together and so forth. I think we all take comfort in the fact that what took place that morning took place for all the right reasons. There was a civilian occupant in the building. We went in there doing our job, interior attack, aggressive search and rescue operations. And in this particular case, something went wrong that at this point in time, all indications are it was completely unforeseeable.
This is all that remains of the house where what should have been a routine fire turned into the biggest tragedy for the Stockton Fire Department in 50 years. They vow now to go on with a positive attitude and solid training, and they'll carry the memories of firefighters Laws and Golden with them. In Stockton, California, I'm Nancy Higgins for Working Fire.
The Stockton Fire Department wants us to pass along their heartfelt thanks for the outpouring of sympathy and support from those of you who kept them in your thoughts and prayers during this difficult time.